Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. First of all, I must thank the hosting community here, the Mohawk Nation of Ganawaki, for receiving us here. I would also like to thank the National Chief, Henry Bigala, and all of the nations for addressing you for this 36th, to give me the floor for this 36th annual meeting. I would also like to thank Elmer Cochen, President of the Elders Council of the AFN, and the Chief, Lorena Montour of Ganasataki, for the opening prayer.
Respected elders and First Nations leaders here today from all corners of this country. Today, as well, my thoughts go to the communities affected by the forest fires in Saskatchewan. I've called on the Prime Minister to deploy all available resources to help those in need. I've had the honor of being in public service for over 35 years now. I served as a public administrator, as a member of the Quebec National Assembly, a cabinet minister, a member of Parliament, and now leader of the opposition. There are days when you get to witness and be part of very special moments in our country's life. I was proud to be in the House of Commons the day the Government of Canada issued its apology for the tragedy of residential schools that we acknowledge today was an attempt at cultural genocide because it corresponds to the UN definition of genocide. I was proud that my friend Jack Layton was singled out for his role in pushing to make this overdue apology a reality. We left the chamber that day with hope and optimism that things would change from that point on. There was another day that I felt similarly proud. That was the day the Shannon's Dream motion, sponsored by Charlie Angus, the NDP MP for Timmins James Bay, was also adopted in the House of Commons. Now, Shannon was a young woman from Northern Ontario who fought tirelessly for better education for her generation and for those who would come after. She died in a tragic car accident, but through the work of her family and her community, her spirit lives on. I met Shannon's family that day and was touched by their courage and determination. Lorsque nous avons quitté la colline, nous étions encore une fois.
When we left the Parliamentary Hill, we were full of hope. And we used to believe that change finally happened. Years went by, but the change did not occur, never occurred. Not sufficient progress has been accomplished. We've had so many false starts, too many empty promises, too many words that were never made real. Too many young natives have seen their hopes and optimism shift into despair and lack of patience. So many people have abandoned, given up, thinking that change could never occur. Let me tell you one thing. I have not, personally, never given up. Because I believe not only that the change is possible, it is more than ever a necessity. And I think that it is time to change the relation that exists between the Crown and the First Nations, the Inuit and Métis. I believe that a new era has to start.
I believe it is time for a new era, one that embraces a true nation-to-nation relationship built on respect and, above all, makes meaningful progress when it comes to bringing about change. Today, I want to share with you some of my ideas on how, working together, we will usher in that new era. A new era means an understanding that meaningful consultation and accommodation isn't just a catchphrase, it's the law. Without real real, meaningful consultation, our country cannot move forward. From reconciliation to resource development, That's why an NDP government will create a cabinet-level committee that I will chair myself. It will ensure that all government decisions respect treaty rights, inherent rights, and Canada's international obligations, starting with the principles of the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is not just the responsibility of one department. It is the duty of the whole Government of Canada. A new era means no longer accepting that First Nations children receive fewer opportunities when it comes to education. Children can't be made to wait any longer. We must not fail another generation. A new era starts with recognizing that every community matters, that every school and classroom matters, that every child matters. And when you start from a place where every child matters, it becomes abundantly clear what we need to do. Il est intolérable qu'un pays riche comme le Canada investisse moins.
It's not tolerable that in a rich country like Canada, we are investing less for some children than others. A new era means that we are going to work in order to end this discrepancy in education. We're going to ensure that every Aboriginal child will receive quality education wherever they live, an education that allows cultures to be beacons, to Aboriginal languages to survive and to thrive. Just like the Supreme Court has said, and let me quote it, language is the bridge between isolation and the community, which allows human beings to understand their rights and obligations they have, the ones towards the others, as well as living within their society.
It's worth recalling those words from the Supreme Court of Canada. Language bridges the gap between isolation and community, allowing humans to delineate the rights and duties they hold in respect to one another and thus live in society. That's why teaching and maintaining Indigenous languages is so essential. Il est donc primordial.
Thus, it is a must that every child will get the same opportunities as all the other children in Canada, because for the NDP, every child is worth.
A new era means that every child will matter. And it will mean that every missing and murdered Indigenous girl and woman matters. Our Aboriginal Affairs critic, Nikki Ashton, introduced a motion in Parliament calling for a full public inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and a national action plan to end violence against women. That motion, yes, that motion was shamefully defeated by Stephen Harper's Conservatives. It's unconscionable that Stephen Harper continues to deny these families justice. These women and girls are not statistics, they are sisters, mothers, and daughters. I remember visiting the exhibit when it came to Edmonton, walking with our sisters, 1,200 pairs of moccasin tops. You know, in one instance, what it is to lose 1,200 women, and if you didn't cry seeing that exhibit, you're just not human. When I heard Justice Sinclair, the Commission chair appointed by Prime Minister Harper himself, rightly call for an inquiry, everyone stood up to applaud and acknowledge. Well, everyone, that is, except the person who was sitting right beside me. It was Minister Bernard Valcourt, the only person in the room who refused to applaud. You deserve a lot better than that. An NDP government will call a national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women within our first 100 days in office. And we will consult you. You will decide with us what the terms and the conditions and the scope of that inquiry is. No one's going to dictate that to you. Now, a new era also means fixing our country's broken treaty process and dealing with unresolved land claims. In 2012, the Harper Conservatives spent nearly $100 million disputing land claims. In fact, they spent more money fighting First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in court than they did prosecuting tax evaders in the whole country. It's time we had a Prime Minister who spends more time working with First Nations than fighting against First Nations. A Prime Minister who comes to the table when provinces and communities set their priorities. As in the case of Shoal Lake 40, the federal government needs to show leadership. So an NDP government will reverse the damage done by Stephen Harper in Bill C-38 and C-45 by putting teeth back into the environmental assessment process and working to protect our lakes and rivers. Or the case of legislation like Bill C-51. Let me tell you, my friends, on Bill C-51, I know where I stand. When civil liberties are threatened, that's not the time to retreat. That is precisely the time to stand your ground and stand up to Stephen Harper. And when elected, an NDP government will repeal Bill C-51 and restore and respect your fundamental rights in Canada. Ahead of his recent meeting with the Pope, I asked the Prime Minister repeatedly to ask Pope Francis to apologize for the Catholic Church's involvement in the residential schools tragedy. Mr. Harper said the decision was the responsibility of the Church. That's not leadership, and that is precisely what needs to change in Canada. We all have a responsibility to learn from this dark chapter in our history. This is not an Indigenous issue, it is a Canadian issue. La Commission de Vérité et de
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission shows us the path towards that new era. But we have to walk together on the path. Together, we need to make sure that apologies will be made, or apologies made in 2008 thanks to the tragedy of residential schools will be more than only empty words. This means a new era. It means that together we need to act upon recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It means that together we need to consult communities and we need to establish priorities. And we have the obligation to show results.
Days of our Prime Minister dictating to Indigenous communities will be over once and for all. You know, over the last several years since becoming leader of the official opposition, there is nothing, not one subject I have dedicated more of my time to than establishing a nation-to-nation relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Crown. This has become one of those issues that I carry with me every single day. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I know that to get a different result, we need a different approach. We need a new era, and it starts with listening. The summer after I became leader, Catherine and I, my wife, had the opportunity to travel across Canada on a listening tour. We wanted to hear from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across the country. It was a moving experience. From coast to coast to coast, we met with chiefs and elders to listen and hear what was their vision for building a true nation-to-nation relationship. Couldn't have been prouder than when many of those people came and visited us at Stornoway on the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Everywhere we went, we saw the strength of people determined to build their communities. Ce sont ces expériences et plusieurs autres qui guident.
These experiences and those of others that have guided my actions. It is the advice of my colleagues, Romeo Saganash from the Cree Nation and Jonathan Genet-Jourdain from the Innu Nation, who guide me and help me to go forward. How should we set up this new era? How can we manage to give hope to people?
It's quite simple. Help me defeat Stephen Harper on October 19th in ridings everywhere across this country. Don't let his unfair Elections Act stand in the way of making sure every voter in your community shows up to vote. Indigenous communities have the power to change the outcome of this election. Now is the time to exercise the influence that you have in your communities and use that power across the land. Change is coming, my friends. Together, we can do this. A new era starts on October 20th. I invite you to be part of it. Thank you. Nyawang, miigwech.